Hey everybody, this is Lonnie Sweet from the Sweet Management Group, and you are either listening to or watching the Never Sell Ice to Eskimos podcast, where we talk to sales executives from the culinary, sports, general business, and entertainment worlds about their journey, about being a salesperson in this industry and what it took to get to where they are today. So whether you're listening in your earbuds, you're sitting in front of your computer, I appreciate you stopping by and hope you enjoy. All right, this is Lonnie Sweet from the Sweet Management Group. This is the Never Sell Ice to Eskimos podcast. As usual, I've got a really good buddy of mine on today. His name is Marc Riccio. He is crushing the USA Lacrosse shirt right now because he's now the CEO of USA Lacrosse, which is pretty amazing. Marc and I met, it had to be about, 20 years ago, close to that, when I was representing Herm Edwards. He was working at the New York Jets. I remember fondly going in and talking to him about the world of Herm and how we're going to go create some cool marketing programs. And just like Marc does, we've kind of stayed in touch, and he's been a good friend, and he's evolved over the years from, his time at the Jets. He spent a bunch of time at Lagardère, which is now Sportfive, did some esports stuff, which was pretty amazing. And then I think landed at the place where the universe realized he was supposed to be, which is USA Lacrosse. And I'm excited just because I think you're one of the better sales guys I've ever met. And this is a sales podcast. So I'm excited to have you on, dude. So thank you.
Thank you. One, it's awesome to reconnect with you. Anytime I can do that, I love it. As we found ourselves in similar lacrosse places over the course of the summer, but it's a great opportunity, chat, have some fun. So appreciate it.
So this is going to be a little bit different than all my other podcasts, because I want to talk a little bit about you as a sales guy, right, over the years, and how that manifests to other people, and how you talk about training, and because I think it's super important, at least just for people to understand kind of how to find their style and how you lean into that. But after that, I really want to transition into how do you use what you've learned to sell the game of lacrosse? And to be fair, just so everybody understands, I am a girls lacrosse junkie. I've got two girls, a 14 and 11-year-old daughters, both who are fully infatuated with the game. I have now coached the game for, I think 7 years. I'm not sure if I still know all the rules, but I will tell you that the game of lacrosse, on the girls' side at least, and I don't pay enough attention to the boys, is one of the hidden gems of sports in our country. These girls are amazing athletes. They are tough. They do not wear pads. So I'm a junkie. I need to get that out of the way just to start off, Marc, just so we can set up our conversation.
I might have to use that line, one of the hidden gems of sport in this country.
It's true.
We hope not to be hidden any longer, to your point. It is a great game, and both men and women, and particularly this was a strong summer of women's lacrosse with the Women's World Championship being held here in Towson, Maryland. So you got the chance to see not only the USA team, which did win gold, and some of the best athletes you could ever wish to see on a field of play, but you also got to saw 29 other nations be part of something truly global and truly unique in terms of the game of women's lacrosse.
Which is pretty insane. I mean, I think everybody knows the name Charlotte North, but I can tell you that as amazing as Charlotte is, what's crazy about is that the other talent that was on that field, right? I think everybody looks at college lacrosse right now as, if you're playing in college, you're the best of the best. There's so many incredible talent that graduated 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years ago that are still crushing the game of lacrosse. That field was so athletic, which really blew me away as how great of athletes all those girls were.
They really were. Taylor Cummins, who was on that team, became the highest goal scorer, point getter for all of USA women's national team, which is saying a lot in terms of the number of quality athletes that have come through the US program. And the game has really grown fast. We are at this unique moment in the game that just this confluence of gender equity, awareness, the level of athlete, the level of technology, and the level of exposure around the game of lacrosse is you created this groundswell and a unique moment for the entire game, but particularly around the women's game. The last time the World Lacrosse Women's World Championship was held in the US was, I think, roughly 2009. And there were, I think, 10 teams. here we are in 2022 when we ran the event, and there were 29 teams. So we're actually 30. One team couldn't get in the country. Uganda had visa challenges, but 30 nations qualified. And so it's not only how it's progressed in the US, but it's how it's progressed globally that really does surprise people sometimes. And it is this unique moment, and there's been incredible exposure around the game. ESPN has invested heavily in the game of lacrosse, and we've been the beneficiary of that and seeing such great growth. But to your point, one of the unique things about the summer is you see, for those who know the game, they know Charlotte North is not a great women's lacrosse player. She's just a great lacrosse player flat out, right? And there's no identify with gender. She's just a great lacrosse player. But she started to transition into a great athlete recognition where you had not only girl lacrosse players, but you had adults and you had boys lining up at the fence line after the game to get autographs. And those become cultural moments, but you need a platform and you need the opportunity. And those things have come together to really expose people to a great game. But particularly the women have been beneficiaries of what is happening in this moment. And so it was pretty awesome stuff.
I love Charlotte North. To me, is kind of like Steph Curry, and that she's changed. She literally has changed the girls' game, right? Like I'm on the field all the time, and I go to these club teams, and Charlotte is known for kind of her 8-meter shot and not running in, but just drilling it into corners. And you see these girls just like now on the 8, like low hanging, getting ready to like blast it. It never works like her, but it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool to see. I akin it to these kids that are taking half court shots or shots beyond the arc because Steph Curry's been able to crush it. But it's really cool. I never saw that before a couple of years ago, and everybody's kind of emulating what Charlotte North is doing. So anyway, we could talk about girls lacrosse all day long, and that I'm trying to figure out ways to kind of hopefully enter into it and leverage my experience in talent marketing to figure out if there's other ways to do it. But anyway, so sales, right? I'm curious because I think your style of selling is for at least from what I think about it, kind of a hybrid, right? Like I know even in the Jets, it was kind of more of a hardcore sale. There was lots of assets, but I think you've grown and you're much more kind of, I don't know, timid maybe these days. And so I'm curious, Mark, just to kind of understand a little bit, like how did you get into your sales style? Like how did you come into your own? What were some of those kind of pivotal moments? Like how did you become the sales guy that you are today? And I know you do a lot more, right? I know that CEO of USA Lacrosse, you're not hawking sponsorships anymore, but I'm curious, just how did you figure out, how did you get to your style now?
Well, I think it's important to recognize, to your point, like everybody's selling. No one ever really wants to accept that, but everybody in the organization sells on some capacity. And I'm sure this has been talked about and been recognized, whether you're selling an idea internally or you're selling an idea to another person around a piece of programming that you want to run, or you're actually selling something for value of, dollars or value in kind for exchange of marketing assets and platform execution. So for me, honestly, I had no formal sales training. I had a lot of degrees. I was highly educated, had work experience. I was a student athlete in college, but I never had and went through a formal sales training program. And when I started with the Jets, I had spent the previous 6 years working at Hofstra University in a full-time capacity around marketing and fundraising. So my first view of sales was from a fundraising lens. And the fundraising lens is very much around stewardship, and it's very much around relationship, and it's very much around your affinity to, at that moment in time, it was Hofstra University and or the athletic program, whether that was volleyball or softball or lacrosse, your affinity to that sport. So you never went in to that moment to ask for funds without developing a relationship, without developing common ground around the affinity of what you were asking them to donate their money towards. So without even really knowing it, that became my foundation, was very much around developing relationships, is developing an understanding of what they care about on the other end of that conversation. And it was a lot of listening and learning. And again, those are the core, skill set to sales. But I was just looking at it through a fundraising lens. And I also looked at it, that's what you did. That's how you learned in a fundraising environment. fast forward, I get the job at the Jets, and half of my day was selling. The other half of my day was marketing and special events. And we were a small shop back then. So you were doing multiple things. So again, it wasn't selling all the time. It was in part being an operator and part being sales. And my sales technique really developed from there. Being, when I started at the New York Jets, we were the third most popular team in the NFL team in the market. Again, according to certain research, depending on what you looked at, it was the Giants, it was the Cowboys, and then us. My first season, we were 1-15. We were.
You think that's different now? I don't think that's different now, by the way. Just
Come on.
It's different now.
Absolutely different. Or at least like
you think they're 3 or 4? You think there's another team in between there somehow?
We're the most popular. We're more popular than the Giants in our own green and white world.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And so you were dealing from a position where you didn't feel like you had a lot of leverage. You were not coming in hot with a hammer. You were coming in really recognizing you had to work hard to earn the trust and the value proposition of the person sitting across from you. Not only because they had NFL options, but they had every other option that exists in New York between the Yankees, the Mets, US Open tennis, which is going on now as an example, New York City Marathon. You had both. Then you had the arts. And this is what other people don't realize when you operate in New York, is that you think that it's such a big market, there's so much opportunity. That is true. But there's also so much competition. There's so much opportunity and options for savvy buyers to get the different solutions they might need, because they don't need sports per se. They have so many other options in not only sport, but also entertainment, music, the arts, etc. And so you had to work hard from that perspective. And you really had to not only deliver, but over deliver. And I used to have this motto, and I used to tell the team at the Jets all the time: you take care of people when you lose. You take better care of them when you win. Not that we won a lot, but when we had that opportunity, you do, because it matters in terms of, it's to the core point I said on the front end in terms of my style, is it's developing relationship, it's understanding what people care about, and providing that value and listening. And so, like I said, it just started naturally from being in a fundraising, stewardship, relationship-driven environment.
I honestly think that the Jets organization, as much as I don't like them as a team because I'm a Patriots fan, right? But I got some, started with you and obviously built a great relationship with Jeff and Jen, the whole team over there. I think even today, they're one of the best organizations in getting creative about how to generate revenue. Like truly getting in there and listening and truly trying to figure out, because they have another option, what are you selling other than wins and losses? And I think it's made them a much better organization from a sales perspective, because it forced them to be better.
Yes.
Which is amazing.
You raise an important point, and this really does come from leadership, and that is risk tolerance. In that the Jets, post Leon Hess sale under Woody Johnson and the leadership of guys like now Jaime Elhai is the president, but even leadership before that, they allowed the team to take risk. We could try new things, and you see some of the benefits of that risk taking in revenue generation. But I can tell you, there's some things along the way that we tried that didn't work. But the outcome was we learned, we got better, and show me a team, a man, a person, a woman who hasn't failed, and I would show you someone who hasn't pushed the envelope and tried risk and pushed themselves. The organization did develop and has developed a reputation for taking some risk and being out on the front end and trying some things that sometimes worked well and sometimes maybe they didn't. But the end is ultimately better from a sales perspective for the organization. And you also hope ultimately better for the fan experience. I mean, that always, is the North Star, at least related to the Jets, is ultimately it's about a value proposition to the fan. If the partner is getting value, that value should inure or benefit to the fan.
For sure.
That was always the objective.
Yeah, I created a 50-yard lounge and had Jets House as part of that Super Bowl. It was to this day, probably my biggest success and also my biggest failure, to be honest with you, like easily, right? And I learned so much from that. So I'm sure you just brought about failure. Like, are there certain pivotal moments in your career that you're like, man, that stands out as a moment where Not that I made a bad decision or like the series of events kind of led to something that didn't work, and like you had that moment where you just kind of said, "Fuck it, I'm going to learn from it and I'm going to move on," and it made you a better kind of executive.
Yeah, there were a couple. The first one was probably Jets Fest, in terms of the NFL was running the NFL experience at the Super
Yep.
Bowl. And I was like, well, imitation is the highest form of flattery. Why aren't we doing that in and around our own training camp? And a couple teams had dabbled in it, but no one had really built out a bigger, you know, fan experience to that magnitude. And a guy by the name of Bobby Parenti, who I reported to at the Jets at the time, I kind of gave him my vision. I was working with Beth Conroy, who is a colleague of mine. She works at the NHL now. And we were like, this is our vision, right? And he said, all right, go. And it was a really empowering moment. And so we were trying to figure out everything from how to bring in portable turf to hiring, 30 to 40 interns from literally we had 2 or 3 the summer before, to building out everything from legal waivers to what happens when lightning strikes, right? It just end to
Right.
end, and then go sell it, by the way. You had to go monetize this thing.
Of course.
And how do we do that? And in some ways, it was a tremendous success. Jets Fest still exists today, all these years later. Now, granted, it continues to go through iterations and it's much more well run. But at the same time, like, we failed epically at certain things. We did a couple of events and we're making this stuff as we go along, and like somebody split their head open on day one. And I was like, oh my gosh, here comes a lawsuit. Like I'm dead in the water. But so in some ways we failed on a lot of those efforts. And then to your point on the Super Bowl experience, we also succeeded on many levels.
Yeah.
So there was that. There was a couple other things. We tried to create an adult fan club, failed, didn't go well. So there's definitely some things along the way that, we gave it a run and didn't work out. I remember one of the things that did work out and also failed at the same time is we were the first team to do a direct to consumer infomercial for product. Never been done before. Like, it was one of my, I stumbled upon it somehow. I don't remember how I figured this idea out. If someone pitched it to me or I developed it myself, we got to go ahead to do it. It's about selling product direct to consumer before a lot of this was happening, certainly in the environment with which it happens today.
Right.
We did like a 30-minute show that was so DIY that aired like after a 4:00 game in a window that we could get in, and the call center was mobbed, and like we couldn't keep up with the orders, but we couldn't monetize it. We still lost money on it. As great as it was, we just couldn't. We didn't have the knowledge or the skill set to take it further. It could have been a great success, but it was a great learning for me to start understanding direct to consumer matters, merchandise and apparel. There's a direct opportunity here in terms of revenue. And we did do some things different years following to actually turn that into a revenue generating business. But we ran a live stream in locker room interview show before any team ever did that. We were the first to do it. And it was wildly successful, but trying to sell that in an environment where people are like, live stream what? On air?
Right.
Like, what am I buying a computer show of, some dude talking to some people in the locker room? I'm not buying that. How do I get rating points out of that? How do I monetize that?
Right.
So trying to sell that became very challenging, but it was a success from a fan engagement standpoint.
I love it. All right. So you were at the Jets, you moved on to more entrepreneurial things, and now you're sitting at the helm of USA Lacrosse. How do you take what you've learned over these years, right? And I would love to dig in more to this entrepreneurial stuff that you did, obviously, right when you left, and then again after Lagardère. But how do you? Well, two things. How do you position this to the growth of USA Lacrosse? Like, how do you take your experience and kind of put that into, to your point, everything is selling, right? And how do you maybe more importantly for our conversation, how do you teach people that, right? Like, I'm always really intrigued, and I think partly because I came from an organization where, we kind of learned on our own, right? There was people around us, and I've thankfully been around some of the best, but there was never formal training for me. And so I'm curious about, like, how do you bring people along and teach them? Because I think you're one of the great teachers in this business as well.
Lot to unpack there. Let me try to handle it in a couple of tranches. The first one is, Jets was an awesome experience. I was lucky enough to go through an organization that went through a sale and an investment into the organization when it was bought by Woody Johnson. So I was able to ride that wave. But most importantly, I was able to work with some tremendously talented people. You referenced Jen and Jeff on the front ends, but people like Bob Brenfleck and Tracy Belmere, and
Oh yeah.
so many quality people there that, part of my job was to run interference for them, to give them air cover and let them go do what they did best. I think
Right.
that is part of it from a leadership perspective in selling, is that I went from being one of the salespeople to then, quote unquote, being the boss. And one of the first things I had to recognize is not everybody does it the same way. And to really identify, my way would have been a certain path. A Tracy Belmere or Bob or Jeff, use those three people as examples. They all had different styles, and each one of their styles was not wrong. It was different than mine. How do I recognize the strengths of their style to get them to the same end game and help them get there, and recognize what they do differently is not better or worse. It's just different. And that is one of the hardest things from a salesperson who's a great seller to go to being the boss. It's because sometimes the greatest sellers are not the best managers, because they got one playbook. And that's the biggest thing I also recognize, because that then segues into when I left the Jets. You got to recognize when to change your playbook. Is that how I sold it to Jets, and then how I led a sales and development team was a certain playbook. And then when you go to an agency world, or you go to esports and you go to venture capital, like, you got to recognize where your playbook is applicable and where, like, you got to learn something new, or you got to learn to adjust. So those are some of the key elements of self-awareness and when to change the playbook. And then in terms of what it was like from being in an agency, where you're selling oftentimes either the services of the agency, or you're representing something that is you don't own. It's somebody else's intellectual property. That is a very different approach, because you're there then to be a steward for other people who are ultimately going to deliver the value, whether it's your own agency or the property with which you're representing. And that's a very different sale, because then you become more of the expert in the room to guide the person on the other end of that purchasing decision about what their best path is. And you go from being an advocate for your own IP, like at the New York Jets, to being an advocate for other people's stuff. And that requires a different level of trust and relationship. It's even a greater level of trust and relationship that you have to establish with somebody.
For sure.
And so,
and you just real quickly, you talked about learning, right, and a new playbook and fortunate. How do you go about doing that, right? Like, is this you're reading books? Are you digging into industries? Like, what's your process of learning? Because I agree with you, by the way. Everybody's got to learn something new, or else we're staying stagnant. But I'm curious about how you went through that.
So it's a two-part answer to the question. So the first thing is recognizing when you're selling, you're problem solving. You're not selling. Your job is to solve somebody else's problem. Every deal that gets done, that, particularly in this case, say, let's say sponsorship or some integrated platform, is solving a problem. You are solving a problem for the brand, who has to acquire new customers, has to, generate more revenue out of the customers they have. They have a new route with which their airline is launching, and they need to communicate their route. They're relaunching a new product or brand. You're solving the problem. So that's the first thing, is reposition the fact that you are solving the problem. The second part of that is every problem that's solved is based in some form of research and insight. What is the real research and insight that is driving the solution to the problem? And how does your sports property or your assets or your solution address the insight that solves the problem? And that's what's often lost in the sales process. People go into it and say, you're Delta Airlines, you're launching a new route from New York to Dublin. We can help you communicate that. Well, dig behind that. How many Irish Americans live in the US? What's the expat ratio? Is it business travel or is it recreational travel? What's the age demographic and segment? When are people buying their tickets for that type of international travel? And how does that match up with your calendar? And if not, find the things going on in your calendar that match up with that purchase cycle. Like, think deeper around the research and insight and how your sports property or your asset solves the problem. That's the first part of the two-part answer. The second part of that is you got to read. You got to learn. You got to read and understand and go to the annual report for them, understand the airline industry. That's the thing I love about sales so much is you have to know a lot about a lot of things. You can't just know one industry sector. You have to know all of them, and you have to have deep enough knowledge to understand what you know and what you don't know. So when you walk in a room with that brand and that brand's agency, you're informed and you can be trusted and you can earn that trust. So I spend almost 2 hours almost every morning reading. And it's everything. I read everything from my industry stuff to other stuff.
Right.
And I'm not reading pop culture. I'm reading about, a little pop culture actually can't hurt because it's relevant in terms of conversation.
For you, it is.
I'm reading about business. Like, I'm not reading about lacrosse. I'm reading about what technology is happening. And that was the other thing in terms of getting away from the Jets and being in venture capital world. Like, I recognize like there's a lot of different ways that people are developing solutions that are smarter and better than I ever thought of or knew of. And how do those technologies, those solutions apply to that chain I just outlined in terms of research insights, connecting it to my sports property and solving the problem to sell them a solution.
Right.
So I read.
I love it. So how do you apply that now to growing the game of lacrosse, right? You're selling every single day, and it may not be a typical sponsorship, which I know I'm sure you're doing that as well, right? Because you got to generate revenue. Yeah. How are you selling the game? And just to set this up, right? 2028 is right around the corner. It's 6 years away. The Olympics are coming back to the United States. God willing, USA Lacrosse is going to be a part of it. So how do you take that knowledge and sell the game of lacrosse and then bring your whole entire organization to that point as well?
What's interesting is you did a very good job of differentiating between the game of lacrosse and then bringing the organization with it. Because that is actually how I look at it. And what I've asked our organization to reposition its thinking along the lines of our job, and the North Star really is getting more people to play the game. It's not about advancing USA Lacrosse, us generating more revenue, and the more revenue we generate, we get to put back in the game as a 501c3. That is factually accurate. But the bigger question goes to, how do we get more people playing the game and fans of the game? And if we do those two things right, the business and mission and revenue, et cetera, will come along with it.
Right.
So what I've said, and I've challenged our organization to say, and actually I talked to the board during the interview process. And the board is freaking awesome. I just so many smart, talented people who want the best thing for the game. I said this to the board. I said, we do a great job in lacrosse of talking to ourselves. We need to do a better job of talking to new audiences. And the board understood that and believed in that. And the organization understands that and believes that. And if you talk to lacrosse people, they will agree with you. Yes, we talk to ourselves too much. We need to talk to new audiences. And that's why things like the Premier League Lacrosse, Athletes Unlimited as two examples, they're doing a very good job of talking to lacrosse people, but they're doing a job of focusing on talking to new audiences. And so to your point about selling the game, for me, it's how do we talk to new audiences? How do we show them this great game in terms of seeing it? It's got a great origin story as a Native American sport that was gifted to us or shared with us by Native Americans as the creator's game. There's deep spiritual roots in this game that is a great origin story. The game is highly athletic. It's gender equitable. The game is more like basketball than any other sport. So if you look at lacrosse, it's basketball, right? Two-man game, pick and roll, team defense, zone, man-on-man, two-person game, three-person game. Like, it's basketball. And so people can understand that, hopefully, when you talk to new audiences. So that's the first threshold, is recognizing from everybody, from a youth community operator to a pro league, that we at USA Lacrosse have a universally accepted goal of growing our addressable audience. And that is the thing we need to focus on. Now, there are definitely strategies and insights to that. And within that, yes, business-wise, we have a P&L. We've got to generate revenue. We've got to engage. We've got to generate more members. but the job is on us to bring that value proposition forward. But if we have a wider audience, more people, and I know this from my venture capital and private equity world, when they look at investing in a product, you're looking at market opportunity. What problem are you solving in terms of engagement or product or service? And what is your market opportunity? We've got a tremendous market opportunity.
It's lots of room for growth, for sure.
Yes.
I've told you this personally. I think you're the perfect guy to grow the sport. So I'm excited to see where it goes. And it's just a great game. Like you said, it really is a great game. And I think it's the best women's game out there. And I think you got me onto Athletes Unlimited. The fact that they changed the game slightly, made the field smaller, cut out a player, sped it up, I think is awesome. I think it's awesome, and I love the idea that they're toying around with things.
Hey, listen, I cannot underemphasize the necessary or the need, I should say, for innovation within our game.
Yep.
And I'm going to give other comparables. Look at the NBA. There was a moment in time when the three-point shot and the dunk were introduced at the time by the ABA, if I got that right, and it was looked at as a joke.
Yep.
Now look at the dunk, of course, but the three-point shot, there are innovations that now go right on through to high school and below. Like those are just innovations. The forward pass in football, I know that's so cliche, but like there was a moment in time where the forward pass was not part of NFL football. And so for those people who look at lacrosse and look at what PLL or NLL or even, PLL Athletes Unlimited, which is the, men's and women's outdoor professional leagues, respectively,
Yep.
and the National Lacrosse League, or the NLL, which is the indoor professional league, they are making adjustments. They are innovating. And I welcome that because they're trying to get to a better end of engagement and player fun. And if you talk to the players, like they like the innovations that have been made. It's a two-point shot, a smaller field. I welcome that at USA Lacrosse to get to those innovations. And so I think there is continued room for innovation in our game to make it more appealing to the players, to make it more consistent for the players, to make it easier for the coaches to coach, the officials to officiate, but the fans to engage and consume, because that's ultimately where, is an important part of our future.
It actually goes back to exactly what you said about problem solving, right? You're trying to solve for a problem for a fan to get them more engaged into a game that they may not know about. So I'm all for it. All right. So can we do a quick little rapid fire? Right. I know You're busy. We're not going to dig into too much of this, but I'm trying to do a better job of shrinking down these podcasts because I can sit here and talk to you all day, and Lord knows nobody wants to listen to my voice. So, all right, ready? Podcast or books?
Podcast.
What's the podcast you're listening to right now?
I listen to this podcast called No Stupid Questions religiously, and it's by Stephen Dubner, who is an economist, and Angela Duckworth, who is a psychologist. And they look at both human and business problems, issues, and they address them from both an economic and psychological point of view. And I find it so interesting all the time. And I'm a junkie.
Are you listening to music or podcasts in your car? Because you're driving a lot these days. What are you listening to?
Podcasts
while you drive, always.
Podcast, or I listen to, I know this is sound hokey, but like super chill, like lo-fi beats or spa music, because then I think about work, and I think about these problems, and I think about the organization and people, everything in my drive time, and I like it quiet.
I do silent. If I've not listened, I usually will turn it off completely. All right, cold email or cold call?
Interesting. More of a cold email, because just like to prep people before a cold call.
Yeah. Zoom or old school phone?
I've become more of a Zoom person. I prefer, if I can, and I don't care what's in your background. I don't care where you are.
Right.
I don't care what you're wearing, but I'd rather Zoom.
Yeah. It's amazing how 3 years later after the pandemic, again, I don't know about you, before the pandemic, we were like, Zoom, what the hell is that? I mean, it really was Skype, right, at the time.
Yes.
I was like, just pick up the damn phone. I don't need to see your face. And I think I'm more of a Zoom guy now too. All right, biggest sales pet peeve.
The presumptive appointment schedule. I get a lot of that now. Like, hey, we've got this product, do you have time tomorrow? Like, no. One, I don't know you. Two,
Right.
what makes you think I'm really going to put something on your calendar for tomorrow? Like,
Right.
that's so ridiculous that I ignore that. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah. How about from a salesperson perspective I don't know to put you on a spot with your team, but like, aside from the cold, random, and I get it on LinkedIn all the time because my agency says a culinary marketing agency. So it's always like, hey, Connect Group dash a culinary marketing agency. It's like, guys, you can at least take 2 seconds to eliminate that, right? Like, for God's sake. But like, what about from a people person? Like, is there something that it just kind of drives you crazy, but things that you have seen over the years that a lot of people do that you wish you could kind of eliminate? Not eliminate, just have them move on from.
The most important thing is don't eliminate. Don't give me a long pitch. I'm never going to read it. I hate to say that, but that's reality. And when I was selling, I would never do that.
Right.
And the other is be honest, bring value, and recognize you are a human being who's trying to do their job. I can absolutely respect that, having been on both sides of the sales process. So I respect people that are, trying to do what their job is in terms of developing a relationship and solve a problem. But that's the most important thing is don't try to solve my problem with one email.
Right.
Just try to develop a common ground and do your homework to understand where we might have a common ground before you reach out to me. Don't think that I'm going to read some email about a value proposition with a proposal in it and be like, oh yeah, that's great.
So I'm interested.
It never happens.
I'm in. All right. So I'm going to ask the question because I'm honestly curious. What's going on with the Olympics? Like, where does it sit? How does it look? Like, what's next for USA Lacrosse? And maybe if it's not answering that question because you're not supposed to, or it's not a good place to be, I understand that. But like, what is next between now and then? And forever who's listening, what the hell can we all do to help you? More importantly.
Oh, I like the wrap on that question. So I will say we are under an NDA. And so I've got to be measured. I'm only going to talk about what's in the public domain. But I can give some background on the back end of that, which would be interesting about the helpful and how we did get here. So first and foremost, this process goes through World Lacrosse as the international federation for the game of lacrosse. World Lacrosse is the only governing body that is recognized by the IOC as the international federation for the game.
Gotcha.
And then USA Lacrosse, as well as 76 other nations like Canada Lacrosse, Australia, GB, Uganda, they are members of World Lacrosse, comparable to every other, international hockey, USA Hockey, etc. And so, as the International Federation runs the process, we are one of 9, meaning lacrosse. We are one of 9 sports that LA28 and the USOPC is evaluating to add to the Olympic program. That is public knowledge.
Okay.
And so World Lacrosse certainly is the point. As the host country, we certainly support World Lacrosse in their endeavor, as does Canada and England and everybody else in terms of that process. And so we defer to World Lacrosse in running that process. LA28 LA28 as the operating and revenue generating arm of that Olympic movement, and the USOPC, which is handed the rights commercially over to LA28, is running that process. That process is ongoing, and that's kind of about all I can say on that. With that said, I think what is important is like, how did we get here, and what does this really mean? So each Olympic host has the opportunity to add sports or disciplines to the Olympic program. And so you have a sport, say in this case lacrosse, and then you have a discipline, in this case sixes. And I think it's important to explain sixes and how people can help to answer your question.
Okay.
And I'm going to equate that to, you have the sport of, say, gymnastics, but you have the discipline of balance beam, just as a but also within gymnastics, you've got floor, so within lacrosse, you have field, which everybody sees, generally here in North America.
Yep.
You have box, which is an indoor version, which people also see here.
Played in the hockey rink. Yep.
Correct. And then you have sixes, which was created by World Lacrosse as a new discipline. Sixes is a smaller field, and it's 6-on-6. Again, my point on basketball, it's even more like basketball. The men and the women's game are very much comparable to where they are today in terms of the sticks, the equipment, or lack thereof. And but the rules are that much more consistent. And so the reason why that discipline was created is that LA 28 can only put 10,500 athletes into the Olympic Village. That is mandated by the IOC. That is not there. That's an IOC decision. That's a hard stop. But each local organizing committee can add sports or disciplines in an effort to attract something that is important to the local fan base, or local community, if you will, that can help with legacy, that maybe is commercially viable, but also gender equitable, highly athletic. And so that's why you look at sports like sport climbing, surfing, and skateboarding added to Japan. Those were sports that check the box on all those things and that are locally relevant. And they were added to the sport program for Japan, as an example. LA has that opportunity. They don't have to add, they can add. And that's my point earlier. We're one of 9 sports that is now under consideration for being part of the Olympic program. But having a sixes discipline lowers the athlete count, which therefore allows a higher likelihood of getting in. Because if you had full team, men and women, multiple nations, you're going to cap yourself out on the athlete count. The other important factor is that for developing nations to field a competitive team, you just need less better athletes. So it actually starts to take the playing field and make it more competitive, which is interesting. And it was exemplified. The sixes discipline. There was a competition around the World Games this summer, which was in Birmingham, Alabama. The first time the sixes discipline was on an international competition level. Japan won the bronze medal in the men's. And let me tell you, we barely beat Japan before we went on to the gold medal game. Japan was excellent. And that the
Did
game.
the US win the gold?
No, we lost to Canada.
I also saw the women lost to Canada too. That's crazy.
Yeah. So
and that was in sixes, or that was in full field?
That was in sixes. We had 4 international competitions this summer. Women's World Championship field senior, we won gold. Probably one of the better teams ever put together in the women's game. Men's and women's sixes this summer, silver medals for men and women. We lost to Canada both those games. And then under 21 men's international competition was Justin Limerick, Ireland. I just came back from Ireland. Our men beat Canada for the gold medal in that game.
That's awesome.
Phenomenal lacrosse. But what you see there is the disciplines of the game evolving, and that's innovation. And the sport in Alabama and Birmingham for the World Games had good crowds. It played well on television. It's a faster, compact game, highly exciting. And we hope that resonates in this evaluation process. To your point, how people can help. First thing is understand innovation in sixes is not here to replace any other discipline. It's here for the specific purpose of providing opportunity and lowering the barriers of entrance at both the international level, but also at the local level. Sometimes you can't field a full team that's competitive, and playing on a smaller field, particularly at young ages where small-sided play should be the norm. You can play a discipline now that actually has Olympic aspirations and is played on the world stage of 6-on-6. And you
How big is the field?
It's roughly 50 by 75 yards or meters. No, it's roughly 75 yards by roughly 50 yards across.
Gotcha. Okay. And do they play both sides, offense and defense?
You play both sides, offense and defense. There's no face-offs other than the quarters. Goal is scored, goalie picks up, you go. It's like basketball. And remember, there was a time in basketball, after every point, you do a tip.
It's amazing. That's amazing. I love it. I can't wait to watch it.
Highly athletic, highly creative, shot clock. It's super fast paced and interesting, but there's great strategy in terms of, just like hockey, just like box lacrosse, how you sub on and off on the fly, the type of athlete you need, the type of system you run, both offense and defense. And so it's a whole nother discipline around innovation that is exposing the game to more people. And that's how you speak to new audiences.
I love it. Awesome. Well, you got a fan, it here. And I tell as many people as I possibly can about the game. You're awesome, dude. You're a great steward of the game. I'm thrilled that you're in that spot. I'm rooting you on. So, and I appreciate this. I appreciate your time. I loved having you on.
I'm flattered to be on. I'm flattered by those comments. I really appreciate it. And I am thrilled for you to, certainly as I've watched your company evolve and talk about having a new playbook and understanding how to evolve with it. You've done a phenomenal job. You went into a space. I remember when you told me you were going into, culinary, there was a moment I gave you one of these, and then it all kind of dawned very quickly in terms of what the opportunity was. And you saw that. And I give you enormous credit for that, but I'm equally, if not more excited about your daughters playing and your love of the game and you being an advocate for the game, because there's a home for you here in terms of what some of the things that you want to do. And I welcome, because bringing smart people into this industry is how we continue to get better. And so I'm on board with you having you a part of lacrosse.
I appreciate it, bud. All right. Enjoy. Hopefully I'll see you on the field soon. If not, when you're in the city next, we'll grab some dinner.
Awesome.
All right, Mark. Thanks, bud. Take care.